What if one compliment from your son-in-law made your heart race like you were 20 again? What if his eyes said things Emily never heard? Tonight, Margaret's quiet Vermont life cracks wide open, because desire doesn't care about wedding rings. Stay with me, this almost broke a family. The evening had that kind of beauty you can't quite put into words. The air was cool but gentle, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke from somewhere down the street. Vermont in autumn had always been Sarah's favorite time of year, the orange and gold leaves crunching underfoot, the dusky sky turning soft shades of pink and violet. It made her feel peaceful, even if her life wasn't as peaceful as the world outside. She was 52 now, a woman with streaks of silver in her chestnut hair and laugh lines that told the story of years both kind and unkind. Life had taught her how to keep her emotions tucked away where no one could easily reach them. She had been a wife once, a mother always, and somewhere along the way, a woman who stopped expecting surprises. Her daughter Emily, only 27, had married a man named James 2 years earlier. From the very first time Sarah met him, she had seen why Emily fell for him. James was warm and charming, the kind of man who always seemed to know the right thing to say. He had a way of looking at people, really looking, that made them feel noticed. He was the sort of man who could make strangers smile and make you believe every word he said. That night, Sarah was hosting them for dinner. She had cooked a roast, mashed potatoes, and an apple pie for dessert, the kind of meal that brought comfort without having to say a word. The table was set with candles. The house smelled like cinnamon, and the fire in the living room was just beginning to crackle. They laughed and talked over dinner, the conversation drifting from Emily's work to small town gossip to memories from the past. James was polite and engaging, always quick with a smile or a compliment for Emily. But every so often, Sarah noticed something strange. His gaze would flicker toward her for just a moment too long. It wasn't enough to be obvious, but she felt it. A quiet awareness, like the hum of a song you can't quite hear but know is playing in the background. Halfway through dessert, Emily's phone rang in the other room. She excused herself, saying it was a work call she had to take. Sarah began clearing the plates, stacking them in her hands. James rose to help, following her into the kitchen. The kitchen light was warm and soft. The quiet after Emily's laughter felt almost heavy. Sarah moved to the sink, rinsing the plates when she sensed James standing close behind her. She turned slightly, meaning to hand him the next dish to dry, but instead found him looking at her in a way that made her heartbeat stumble. "Sarah," he said quietly, almost like it was a secret. "You look beautiful tonight." She froze. It was not the kind of comment an in-law should make to his wife's mother. And yet, the words felt different from the polite compliments he gave Emily about her dress or her hair. There was something personal in them, something that lingered. For a moment she couldn't speak. She was aware of the faint smell of his cologne, the steady warmth of his gaze. She told herself it was nothing, just a kind remark, but the tone in his voice made her wonder if there was more. "Thank you," she managed, her voice careful. The air between them seemed to thicken, as if there was an unspoken question hanging there. She felt a flutter in her chest that startled her, and she hated herself a little for feeling it. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way, looked as though she was more than just someone's mother or someone's past. Before anything else could be said, they heard Emily's footsteps on the stairs. James stepped back so smoothly it was as if nothing had happened. His easy smile returned as Emily walked in, chatting about her phone call. Sarah busied herself with the dishes, her hands moving automatically while her mind replayed what had just happened. She told herself she was imagining it, that maybe she had read too much into a harmless comment. But deep down she knew the truth. Something had shifted in that kitchen. Something small, yes, but enough to stir feelings she thought she had locked away forever. The rest of the evening passed without incident. Emily and James left after coffee, promising to visit again soon. Sarah stood by the doorway as they walked to their car, watching the way James glanced back at her one last time before getting in. It was just a look, but it wasn't just a look. When she closed the door behind them, the house felt too quiet. She leaned against the wall, her thoughts tangled. She knew she should forget about it. She knew she would forget about it. But as she turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs to bed, the warmth of his voice and the weight of his gaze followed her into the dark. In the days after that night, Sarah tried to push the moment in the kitchen out of her mind. She told herself it had meant nothing, that James was simply being kind. After all, he was her son-in-law. There was no reason to believe his words carried anything more than politeness. But the truth was, she couldn't stop replaying it. The tone in his voice, the warmth in his eyes, the way he had stepped back just in time before Emily walked in. It all lingered in her thoughts like a song she couldn't stop humming. She hated that part of her felt lighter whenever she thought about it. and she hated even more that she wanted to feel it again. 3 days later, Emily called to say she had to leave town for work. She would be gone for almost a week. Sarah wished her well, told her to be careful, and promised to check in. She didn't expect to hear from James while Emily was gone. But on the second afternoon, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, James was standing there with 2 paper cups of coffee in his hands and that easy smile she had come to know. "Thought you might like some company," he said. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. She told herself it would be harmless. They were just going to have coffee. They settled on the porch, the world outside blurred by a steady drizzle. The rain tapped against the windows, the air smelling of wet leaves and earth. They talked about small things at first, the weather, a new cafe that had opened in town, the books they were reading. But then James started asking questions that felt different. "What were you like before you were a mom?" he asked, his eyes fixed on hers. Sarah laughed softly, almost embarrassed. "It was a long time ago. I want to know," he said, leaning forward just a little. "Tell me?" And so she did. She told him about her 20s, about the job she had loved before marriage, about the way she had dreamed of traveling but never did. She told him about the man she had once loved but lost, and how life had quietly closed certain doors without asking her if she was ready. James listened without interrupting, his expression soft but focused. It had been years since anyone had listened to her like that, not as a mother or an older woman, but as a person with her own story. At one point, while she was speaking, his hand brushed hers. It was light, almost accidental, but she didn't move it away. Her breath caught without her meaning it to. "Do you ever think about what could have been?" he asked quietly. The question made her chest tighten. She wasn't sure if he was asking about her past or about something else entirely, something dangerous. She looked at him, searching for the right words, but all she could manage was a faint, "sometimes." A moment of silence passed, the kind that feels heavy with things neither person dares to say. The sound of rain filled the space between them, and she suddenly realized how close they were sitting. If she leaned forward just slightly, she could have reached him. She didn't move. Eventually, James glanced at the time and stood up. "I should let you rest," he said. His tone carried something unspoken. Sarah walked him to the door, her pulse still unsteady. Before he stepped out, he turned back, his eyes catching hers in a way that made her feel both seen and undone. "Thanks for the coffee," she said, her voice softer than she intended. He gave a faint smile. "Any time." After he left, Sarah sat back down on the porch, staring out at the rain. She told herself it was nothing. But the truth was, she hadn't felt this alive or this afraid in years. That night she lay in bed, the quiet pressing in around her. She thought about the way he had listened, the way his hand had brushed hers, and that question, "what could have been?" echoed in her mind over and over, and she realized something that unsettled her deeply. She wanted to see him again. That night, Sarah lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts were loud and tangled, swirling in ways she didn't want to admit. She told herself over and over that what was happening was wrong. James was her daughter's husband, the man who should have been loyal only to Emily. But her heart felt heavy and restless, as if it wanted something she had long forgotten. She thought about the way James had looked at her, the gentle touch of his hand on hers, and the quiet question he had asked. "Do you ever think about what could have been?" It wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about them. For years, Sarah had lived her life carefully, always doing what was expected of her. She had loved and lost, raised her daughter, and buried parts of herself under duty and kindness. But now with James, something had stirred, a feeling of being seen, desired, and alive. The next day, James came by the house again. Emily was still away, and Sarah hadn't expected to see him. But there he was, standing at her door with that same warm smile, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked from the nearby fields. "I thought you might like these," he said softly. Sarah took the flowers, their scent light and fresh, and invited him inside. They sat in the living room, the afternoon sun casting soft shadows through the curtains. They talked about simple things again, but beneath the words was a tension neither could ignore. James looked at Sarah with a kindness that felt like a promise. Slowly, almost without thinking, he reached out and took her hand in his. His touch was gentle but sure, and Sarah didn't pull away. Instead, she felt warmth spreading through her body, a mix of comfort and fear. For a moment, the world outside seemed to stop. It was just the two of them, connected by something neither wanted to name aloud. James leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "I can't stop thinking about you." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to believe it was a momentary weakness, a mistake that could be fixed. But the truth was, she had been thinking about him, too. She wanted to pull back, to remind him. And herself, of the lines they shouldn't cross. But her heart wouldn't listen. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she blinked them away quickly. "James, we can't," she said, her voice trembling. He nodded, his eyes full of regret and something deeper. "I know," he said softly. "It doesn't change how I feel." Sarah looked down at their joined hands. She felt trapped between two worlds, the safety of what was right and the dangerous allure of what felt so real. That night she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the moment when James had held her hand, the softness in his eyes, and the way her own heart had betrayed her. She thought about Emily, her daughter, her joy, her reason for being careful. How could she protect Emily if she let this feeling grow? How could she forgive herself if she didn't? The days that followed were filled with quiet moments of longing and regret. Sarah and James kept their distance, but the unspoken connection between them pulsed like a secret thread, pulling tighter with each passing hour. One evening, as they were saying goodbye after a visit, James stopped her at the door. His voice was low, urgent. "Sarah, I don't want to hurt Emily, but I can't pretend this isn't happening." Sarah looked into his eyes, filled with both hope and sorrow. "Neither can I." They stood there on the edge of something that could change everything, knowing the next step could shatter the family or break their own hearts. Sarah felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her. She knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. After the last visit with James, Sarah felt as if the world around her had shifted in a way she couldn't control. The house felt quieter, heavier, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She spent the next day moving slowly through her routine, but inside her thoughts raced. Every moment with James had left a mark on her heart, soft, painful, and impossible to ignore. She thought about Emily's bright smile, her trust, and how much she deserved a mother who would never betray her. That evening, Sarah made a choice she knew would change everything. Instead of calling James or meeting him again, she drove out to a small lake just outside their town. It was a quiet place she had loved since she was a child, where the water mirrored the sky and the trees whispered secrets. She sat in her car watching the sunset in soft colors of pink and gold. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and typed a message. "James," she wrote, "we can't see each other like this anymore. Whatever feelings we have to stop now. For Emily, for ourselves, I hope you understand." She sent the message before she could change her mind, then sat back, the quiet settling around her like a blanket. Sarah knew the decision would bring pain, but she also knew it was the only way to protect her daughter and herself from heartbreak that could never be undone. The next morning, Emily returned from her trip, smiling and tired, full of stories about her work and the people she had met. Sarah greeted her warmly, but inside she felt like a part of her was breaking. She kept the secret of her own heart locked away, hidden behind polite smiles and quiet conversations. James was different too. That night during dinner, he avoided looking at Sarah directly. His eyes dropped to his plate or stared out the window. But once, when he thought no one was watching, their eyes met across the table. There was a flicker of something, longing, regret, and a silent promise that what had passed between them would remain their secret. Sarah smiled faintly, though inside she ached. She had chosen loyalty over desire, her daughter's happiness over her own longing. But the question that haunted her most was this: what if? What if she had allowed herself to feel more? What if she had crossed that line? The thought stayed with her like a shadow, always there, soft but persistent. It reminded her of the warmth she had felt in James's touch, the kindness in his voice, and the moment when her heart had betrayed her own rules. Life went on as it always does. Emily continued to trust and love her husband, unaware of the delicate tension that had almost broken their family apart. Sarah buried her feelings deep, choosing to remember the night sky at the lake and the promise she had made to herself. Sometimes late at night, she would find herself staring out the window, thinking about what might have been. But she knew deep down that some lines were meant to be respected, even when the heart wants to cross them. And so Sarah carried on stronger, wiser, and forever haunted by the choice she had made.